G'day, there's a funny story going around. Australia was in really good shape before the pandemic. That's the funny story. It's coming out, this narrative is coming out of the Prime Minister's office and the Treasurer's office, out of Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg's media manipulation machine. The narrative goes that things were going really well and then we were laid low by the pandemic. In fact, on the government's own metrics, GDP, that great metric, measures everything in terms of economic growth, they were going south. The economy had gone down, it's bumping along the bottom. Josh Frydenberg was desperately trying to achieve his cherished budget surplus. Well, in September 2019, he gave up just $700 million short of the target, short of the balanced budget. Now, he's $200 billion short. The economy was absolutely totaled, absolute train wreck, but now it's bouncing back. The question is, will it be a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery? It's our contention that it is going to be a K-shaped recovery. And a K-shaped recovery is when some people get the V-shape and other people get the slippery slide. At the end of March, at the end of next month, there's a time of reckoning. And that is when Job Seeker and Job Keeper, under their present arrangements, end. Some people are looking at it as a cliff. The government, of course, is toying with the idea of calling an election, when to call an election, and what they are going to do. Will they provide further stimulus? The problem before the pandemic, when things were very listless, very lacklustre, was that Josh Frydenberg, as Treasurer, had stuck to the fabled Tory economic program and just withdrawn money from the economy, not spent. The Reserve Bank was there prodding him, come on, use some fiscal expansion, start spending some money to get the economy going. It's the same deal now. It may be some sort of record, but last week, the Reserve Bank governor had no less than three public outings. Usually, it's sort of one every few weeks, where every economist all sits around and dotes on every word said by the Reserve Bank governor. Philip Lowe was out 3 times last week before estimates, in a National Press Club address, somewhere else, 3 times in 1 week. Each time really encouraging the government, giving them a little pat on the head for Josh Frydenberg, saying, you're doing well with your fiscal stimulus. They're not really. It's sort of like Reserve Bank and Treasury code for, come on, start pumping some money into the economy or otherwise we're going to be completely wrecked at the end of March, when all this money is pulled from the economy. When the poor jobless people go back to $40 a day below the poverty line. And when the great cash splash for business, the great thing that was rorted by big business so much and is still being rorted, Job Keeper. When that stimulus is withdrawn too, the economy will of course contract. The economy expands if money goes into it, it contracts if money comes out of it. It's quite a simple equation. For some reason, they're still talking about austerity. Josh Frydenberg, who has a penchant for Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, for the tighten the belts view of the world, fiscal prudence, fiscal propriety. Meanwhile, the reality is, of course, that this budget deficit, this $200 billion, where's he getting that? How's he funding that? How are we going to fund all this? Printing money, or just creating money, just making it up. And they're doing that. They don't call it that. It's actually called quantitative easing. Whenever economists or lawyers don't want you to understand something, they come up with a stupid phrase. Printing money is actually quantitative easing. It's creating new money. The banks buy the bonds from the Treasury, and the Reserve Bank buys the bonds from the bank. And when it buys the bonds from the banks, the big banks, it credits their accounts with cash. And that's the way that new money is created. We don't call it printing money because that's rude, and it's not a direct process between the Reserve Bank and the Treasury. We've got the private banks. It's been outsourced. The printing presses have been outsourced to the banks. The aim of the government was to get the banks to lend the money to the small business people, so the small business people could put new people on and expand their businesses and so on. That hasn't happened because the banks are sitting on $100 billion in cash, just sitting there. They're not spending it because big business has got enough money. Money's almost free for them. Interest rates are very low. They've got relatively clean balance sheets, but the banks won't lend to the small businesses, and the government wants them to. They're just sitting on all this money. In fact, they would rather have their money, the big four banks, sitting in what they call the Reserve Bank's exchange settlement accounts, or ESAs, just sitting there earning zero interest, than they would lending it to small business, because lending it to small business is a risk. You may not get your money back. They'll lend it to BHP. They'll lend it to Woolworths or Coles, but Woolworths or Coles, they don't need any more debt. And this is the conundrum. So what are they using this money for? All this money. What's the point of it if it's not going to small business? If it's not going to stimulate the economy? In the wake of the pandemic, or as we slowly grind out of the pandemic, we are facing a K-shaped recovery. The stock market's at record levels. The rich people, there's nothing wrong with the rich people. Some of my closest friends are rich people. The rich people are doing very well. Their wealth is at record levels. Big business has done very well because the government's picked up, or the public money has picked up the wages bill. And so their profits, for many, not if you're in aviation or tourism obviously, but the profits of many Australian companies and many international companies operating here are at record levels. The thing for the government is, heading into an election, the big companies don't vote. Small business people do vote. And they're struggling. They're really struggling. Some of them have got JobKeeper, and that's a good thing. But the issue for them is, what's the government doing for them? Well, the government is helping them on the wage front. And the view appears to be that austerity is good for this process, because austerity will keep wages lower, because it will create more people desperate to get a job and to work for extremely low wages. So that's the favour. That's the Josh Frydenberg payoff for the small business people. Please like it or dislike it. See you next time.